Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. Once upon a time, a beautiful girl lived in a castle at the edge of a forest. She had hair as black as coal, lips as red as roses, and skin as white as snow, and so she was called Snow White. She lived with her father, the king, and her stepmother, the queen. Now her stepmother was very beautiful, but she was also very vain. Every morning she would look in her mirror and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror would reply, "Of all the women in this place, you have got the loveliest face." And the queen would be pleased, because she knew the mirror never lied. Then, one day, she asked the usual question, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the reply came back, "Madam, you are very fair, but there is one beyond compare. Her beauty shines so clear and bright. The fairest is, of course, Snow White." The queen flew into a rage, and from that day on she hated Snow White. She took away her pretty dresses and gave her rags to wear. She made her scrub the floors and clean out the stables. Snow White was very sad, and dreamed of the day a handsome prince would come and save her. Despite her unhappiness, Snow White grew more and more beautiful every day. The queen was furious. She ordered a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and kill her. But the huntsman had a kind heart, and instead of killing her, he told her to run away. But he warned her that she must never come back to the castle. Snow White ran deep into the forest until she could no longer see the castle on the hill. Through the trees, she saw a clearing in the forest and a small cottage that stood there. She knocked on the door. There was no answer, so she stepped inside. Everything in the cottage was tiny. The table in the kitchen had 7 tiny chairs round it. In the bedroom upstairs were 7 tiny beds. The cottage was very dirty, so Snow White took a broom and swept the floor and washed the pots and pans in the sink. After all this, she was very tired, so she lay down on one of the little beds and fell asleep. Now the house was owned by 7 dwarfs, who worked every day in the diamond mines in the mountain. They came home that night to a shiny kitchen and a polished floor. They were very surprised. But when they saw Snow White asleep, they didn't know what to do. They had never seen anyone so beautiful. When she woke up, they asked her who she was. Snow White told them, and that she was hiding from the queen, who wanted to kill her. "If you'll let me stay here, I'll cook and clean and look after you," she said. "In fact, supper's nearly ready." The dwarves were delighted with their guest, and Snow White kept her word. She cooked and baked and cleaned and scrubbed and kept the house spick and span, and they all lived together very happily. But the dwarves were frightened that the queen would harm Snow White, so they told her to beware of strangers, and Snow White promised that she would. Meanwhile, in the castle, the queen was not happy. When she asked the mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" the answer came back, "Snow White lives not far from here, with 7 dwarfs who hold her dear. And queen, though you are fair, it's true, she is still more lovely than you." The queen cursed Snow White and planned her revenge. She disguised herself as an old beggar woman and went deep into the forest to find Snow White. Snow White was sweeping the hearth when she heard a knocking at the door. She remembered the dwarf's warning and asked, "Who is it?" A voice said, "Just a poor old beggar woman with apples to sell." Snow White took pity on her and opened the door. There stood an old woman dressed in an old black bonnet and a tattered shawl. She was holding a basket of shiny red apples. "I'll buy one of your apples," said Snow White. "They look delicious." She took an apple from the old woman, and no sooner had she taken a bite from the shiny red fruit than she fell to the floor. The beggar woman laughed. "I've got you at last, Snow White," she said. "Your only hope now is a kiss from your one true love." Just then, the 7 dwarfs arrived home from the diamond mines. They saw a dark figure running away from the cottage through the forest. "Oh no, it's the wicked queen!" they cried. "Catch her, men!" And they ran after her through the forest and up the mountain. In her rush to escape, the queen tripped over her shawl and stumbled. She lost her grip on the steep mountain edge and fell down, down into a gorge. When they got back home, the dwarfs found Snow White still lying on the cold stone floor. They could do nothing to wake her. So they made a special case out of crystal glass. They laid Snow White in the glass case and took her to her favourite place in the forest. There, they took turns to keep watch over her night and day. The seasons passed, and Snow White lay in her glass case, as beautiful as ever, but completely still. In a nearby kingdom, a young prince heard about the beautiful young girl lying in her glass case. He rode out to the forest on his white horse, and there he came to the clearing and saw the dwarfs guarding their precious charge. At first, the dwarves did not want to let the prince near Snow White. They were frightened he would harm their beautiful friend. But the prince was so kind, and he had travelled so far that their hearts melted. The prince kneeled down beside the glass case and lifted the lid. He gazed down at Snow White, lying there so still, and in that moment his heart was filled with love for her. He bent down and kissed her soft white cheek. Suddenly, Snow White's eyes opened, and the first thing she saw was the handsome prince. She remembered the dream that she had when she was scrubbing the floors at the castle, and she knew that her wish had come true. She took the prince's hands and stepped out of the glass case. The prince said, "Will you be my bride and come and live with me in my castle?" Snow White smiled and said, "Yes." The dwarves were filled with joy that their beloved friend had been brought back to life. They thanked the prince and asked Snow White to come and visit them every spring. She promised she would, so long as they came to see her at the palace. Then the prince helped her onto his white charger, and together they rode off to live happily ever after. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Goldilocks. She lived with her mother and father in a little house on the edge of a wood. Goldilocks had long, curly golden hair and big blue eyes and a turned-up nose. She was always poking her nose into other people's business. Her mother was always telling her, "Goldilocks, you're so nosy. One of these days you'll get into trouble." And she was right. Goldilocks loved going into the woods and exploring. She poked her nose into birds' nests and foxholes, and she liked to chase bunnies and climb trees. Then, one day, she went deep into the wood, to a part she hadn't been to before. She came upon a little house. There was smoke coming out of the chimney. There were window boxes full of pretty red and white flowers. Goldilocks wanted to know who lived in the house, so she went up to the front door. Now in the house lived 3 bears, Mummy Bear, Daddy Bear and Baby Bear. They had just sat down to eat their porridge. Daddy Bear took a spoonful of his and said, "Ouch, this is too hot to eat." Mummy Bear said, "Let's go and see if we can find where the bees are hiding. We can get some honey from them." Baby Bear said, "Then, by the time we get back, our porridge will be cool." "Good idea," said Daddy Bear. So, off they went. They were only going for a short walk, so they didn't lock the front door. And that's how Goldilocks got into their house. She pushed open the door and peered into the little house. It was very clean and neat. The kitchen had blue and white curtains at the windows. All the plates were blue and white too. The table was set for breakfast. On the table were 3 bowls of porridge. Goldilocks was very hungry after playing in the woods. She took a spoon of porridge from the big bowl. "Ugh," she said, "much too salty." Then she took a spoon of porridge from the medium-sized bowl. "Ugh," she said, "much too sweet." Then she tried a spoonful of the smallest bowl of porridge. She said, "Perfect. Not too salty, not too sweet. That's just how I like it." And she finished it all up. After that, she was very full, so she went into the living room. She said, "I think I'll sit down now." In the living room, there were 3 armchairs. A big blue chair with a high back, a squashy yellow chair with lots of cushions, and a little tiny green chair made of wood. Goldilocks sat in the big blue chair. "Oh no," she said, "that's much too hard." Then she sat in the yellow chair. "Oh no," she said, "that's much too soft." Then she sat in the green chair. She wriggled and jiggled and bounced and bumped and said, "Perfect. Not too soft, not too hard. That's just how I like it." But she had wriggled and jiggled and bounced and bumped so much that the chair leg broke and Goldilocks fell on the floor. "Oh dear," she said, "I've broken the chair." So she quickly ran upstairs. In the bedroom there were 3 beds. Goldilocks said, "I think I'll lie down for a bit. I'm feeling sleepy." She tried the first bed. It was a big brass bed. "Oh no," said Goldilocks. "This bed is much too high. I can't sleep here." So she climbed onto the second bed. It was a low wooden bed, sunk in the middle. "Oh no," said Goldilocks. "This bed is much too low. I can't sleep here." Then she tried the third bed. It was a lovely white cot. "Oh yes," said Goldilocks.
"Not too high, not too low. This bed is perfect."
And she snuggled into the pillow, pulled the blankets over her, and fell fast asleep. Meanwhile, the 3 bears had found the honeybees and their secret store of honey. They had brought some of the honey home for their breakfast.
"This honey is for my porridge,"
said Baby Bear.
"Yum."
When they got to the house, the front door was wide open.
"That's odd," said Daddy Bear. "I didn't leave the front door open."
They went into the kitchen and sat down at the table. Daddy Bear looked at his porridge and said,
"Someone's been eating my porridge."
Mummy Bear looked at her porridge and said, "Someone's been eating my porridge." And Baby Bear was just putting some delicious fresh honey onto his porridge when he said,
"And someone has been eating my porridge, and they've eaten it all up."
Baby Bear started to cry. Now, said Mummy Bear, "let's go and sit down." They went to the living room and sat in their chairs. Daddy Bear jumped up.
"Someone's been sitting in my chair."
Mummy Bear leapt up. "Someone's been sitting in my chair." And Baby Bear cried,
"Someone's been sitting in my chair, and they've broken it."
Mummy Bear hugged Baby Bear and said, "Never mind, we can mend it." The 3 bears looked at each other and ran upstairs. They went into the bedroom. Daddy Bear looked at his untidy bed.
"Someone's been sleeping in my bed."
Mummy Bear looked at her rumpled bed. "Someone's been sleeping in my bed." Then Baby Bear looked in his bed and he saw Goldilocks fast asleep.
"Someone's been sleeping in my bed, and she's still there. Look."
The 3 bears looked crossly at Goldilocks, sleeping in Baby Bear's bed. At that moment, she woke up and screamed. She had never seen a bear before, let alone 3. She was very scared. She jumped out of Baby Bear's bed, leapt down the stairs and out of the front door. Then she ran through the wood as fast as her legs would carry her, not stopping until she got all the way home. And from that day to this, Goldilocks has never poked her nose into other people's business again. And the 3 bears always lock their front door when they go out.
The Frog Prince. There was once a little princess who lived in a big, grand castle with her mother and father, the king and queen. As she had no brothers or sisters, she would often play on her own. Now her favourite toy of all was a tiny golden ball that she would toss high up into the air and catch when it came down again. One hot summer's day, the princess took her little golden ball outside and went into the cool forest that surrounded the castle. She sat down under a huge lime tree next to a dark pool and started to play catch. Up she threw her ball and down it would come. But on the 7th time she missed the ball completely and it fell into the murky pool at her feet. The little princess was so sad that she began to cry. "Oh, my golden ball! I've lost it forever! I'll never see it again!" "Don't cry, princess," croaked a small voice. "If I return your golden ball, what will you give me?" The princess gasped, looked around, till at last she realized that the voice was coming from a tiny frog that was sitting on a lily pad. "Can you really fetch my ball?" she said. "Of course I can. But first, you must promise to give me whatever I want," said the shiny creature. "Oh, I would give you anything, Mr. Frog. If you return my golden ball, you shall have anything you like." "All I want," croaked the frog, "is to be your companion. Promise me that I can sit at your table, eat from your plate, drink from your crystal goblet, and sleep on your silk pillow." "I promise," said the princess. With that, the frog disappeared into the dark water with a splash that sent hundreds of tiny bubbles to the surface. "What a silly frog to ask such stupid things of me, the king and queen's daughter!" said the princess. Just then the frog jumped up onto the lily pad, and from there he leapt onto the grass next to the princess's feet, where he opened his mouth and out fell the tiny golden ball. The princess picked up the ball, looked at the frog and said, turned and ran back to the castle without a second word. "Wait for me," croaked the frog. "Remember the promise you made. Come back." But it was no use. The princess had gone. Later that night, the entire castle was sat down to dinner in a great banqueting hall. Minstrels were playing lutes in a gallery. Clowns were dancing and making people laugh as they ate and drank the finest food and wines. Everybody was having a grand time. But just as the musicians were preparing to play their next tune, a strange sound could be heard echoing up the stone staircase. One by one, the people stopped what they were doing and listened. They heard the sound again. By now, every head was turned toward the door, waiting to see what was making the strange noise. The little princess was the first to shriek as the frog's head came into view. "What are you doing here, you disgusting frog?" shouted the princess. "The promise you made when I found your ball deep in the water is why I call," said the frog. "What is he talking about?" demanded the king. "Well, you see, father," said the embarrassed princess, "this afternoon I dropped my ball into some murky water in the forest, and I made a silly promise to this frog so that he would dive down and get it for me." The king looked at the frog and then at the princess. "Well, my dear," he said at last, "strictly speaking, of course, a promise is a promise, even if it is to a frog. I'm afraid you must keep your word." The sulking princess went over to the frog, picked him up, and lifted him onto the table. "Give me my supper," said the frog. "Remember, it must be off your plate." The princess gave some food off her own plate to the frog. "Give me a drink," demanded the frog. The princess lifted her crystal goblet to his lips, and when he had finished, he said, "I'm tired. I want to go to bed." The king waved his hand as if to say, "You'd better do as he says." The princess took the frog up to her bedroom and laid him on her silk pillow, where he sat croaking. Before long, the noise made the princess lose her temper. "I can't sleep if you make that terrible noise," she said. And with that she picked up the frog and threw him out of the window. "There," she said, "sleep out there, you ugly old frog." But as the frog landed on the grass, a puff of smoke emerged from the ground, and the frog transformed into a handsome prince. He smiled up at the princess. "Thank you, princess. You have broken a wicked spell that was put on me by a bad witch. Come with me. My carriage is waiting." And soon the princess fell in love with her frog prince, and from that day on, she always kept her promises. The Pied Piper. This is the story of a strange thing that happened many years ago in a sleepy little town in Germany called Hamelin. Now, Hamelin was a very pleasant place to live. There were parks and gardens full of children playing, beautiful steeples on the churches, and tall gabled buildings. And outside the town walls there flowed a clear, sparkling river, where the men of the town would spend the long, lazy summer's evenings fishing. But one year, a terrible plague of rats appeared and infested every sewer, house, garden and street, turning this charming old town into a seething mass of vermin. Before long, the citizens of Hamelin were afraid to venture out of their homes for fear of being bitten or knocked off their feet by the rampaging hordes of rats. Within a week, Hamelin had changed from being a happy, lively place into a ghost town. The mayor of Hamelin and his aldermen met every day in the city hall to discuss how they could get rid of the rats and restore the peace and tranquility to their lovely town. Every idea that was suggested was met with cries of, "Impossible! It will never work! We can't do it!" The mayor was deeply distressed. If a solution was not found soon, he knew that the citizens of the town would demand that he give up his lofty position as mayor, and he would be ruined. He sat in silence with his head in his hands, waiting for an answer to his prayers. Just then, a loud rat-tat-tat-tat was heard on the chamber door, which made the aldermen jump out of their skins and caused the mayor to shout out in a tight, squeaky voice, "Come in!" The door swung slowly open, and in strode a tall, thin stranger, who was dressed in the most unusual way. On his head was a pointed green and yellow hat. His coat was made of different coloured fur skins, and his boots were a bright, shiny red. From his leather belt there hung a long wooden flute, which his fingers seemed to run nimbly over as he spoke. "Your honours," he said, in a dark, mysterious tone. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am known as the Pied Piper, and I have heard about your problem with rats. I can help you to get rid of them." All at once the room was alive with excited shouts of, "Oh, thank you, kind sir! We'd be so grateful to you! Of course we'll pay you well!" "The price," said the Pied Piper, "will be 50 gold pieces." "50?" cried the mayor. "Why, if you can rid our town of this terrible plague of rats, I will give you 100 gold pieces." The Pied Piper smiled a strange, crooked sort of smile and replied, "Dear sir, consider it done." Before the mayor and his aldermen could blink, the piper had turned on his heels and was out of the door. "Quick, follow him!" said the mayor, as he followed the stranger down the stairs and out into the street. No sooner had the mayor stepped out of the city hall when he heard a high-pitched whistle, 3 long notes. They seemed to hang in the air like a wonderful rainbow. The piper stood in the middle of the marketplace, his head bent to one side, playing this strange tune on his long wooden flute. Suddenly, without any warning, the rats that were scurrying to and fro stopped in their tracks and turned their heads toward the piper, as if they were listening to the music. The piper, still playing his flute, walked slowly out of the marketplace and headed toward the city walls, followed by a stream of rats that were by now walking behind the Pied Piper in their thousands. Rats poured out into the street until the cobblestones looked like a sea of grey and brown fur. The squeaking noise they made sent shivers up the mare's back. On and on the piper walked until at last he reached the fast-flowing river, whereupon the rats, each and every one of them, jumped into the water and drowned. In Hamelin, the townsfolk were celebrating. Bells were ringing, children danced and sang. The town was back to its old self. The mayor and his aldermen were congratulating each other and laughing loudly, when out from the merry crowd there came the Pied Piper. He walked up to the mayor and said, "The rats have gone. Give me my 100 gold pieces." The smile from the mayor's face dropped as he said, "My good fellow, you didn't honestly expect me to pay you, did you? Begone, or I'll have you arrested." The Pied Piper fixed him with a steely stare and said, You'll be sorry that you betrayed me." He then lifted his flute to his lips and played the same long, shrill notes. The mayor and the alderman froze in horror as they watched the children of Hamelin slowly follow the Pied Piper out of the marketplace to the city wall and up a steep mountainside where they vanished, never to be seen again. The mayor had paid a very high price for lying to the stranger, the man who had become known as the Pied Piper of Hamelin.
Pinocchio. Once upon a time, in a small village in Italy, lived an old woodcarver called Geppetto. He lived alone with his cat, Figaro, and a goldfish called Clio. He spent his days making beautiful toys for children, but his greatest wish was for a child of his own. So, one day, he took a piece of wood and a chisel and made a boy puppet with strings attached to his arms and legs so he could dance. He called him Pinocchio. That night, Geppetto looked up at the evening star shining in the sky. He closed his eyes and made a wish. "Oh, evening star so far away, make my wish come true today." He wished that Pinocchio would come to life, and as he spoke, a blue fairy stepped down from the evening star. She sprinkled fairy dust on Pinocchio's arms and legs, and suddenly he started dancing and jumping without strings. The blue fairy told him that he must always be honest and bold and wise if he wanted to be a real boy. Now, in Geppetto's fireplace lived a little cricket called Jiminy Cricket. The blue fairy said to him that he must help Pinocchio and teach him the difference between right and wrong. Then, with a wave of gold dust, she disappeared. The next day, Pinocchio set off for school. He waved goodbye to Geppetto, who laughed and waved back. He could not believe his wish had come true. Pinocchio walked down the road past Stromboli's Marionette Theatre. Now outside the theatre stood honest John Worthington Foulfellow, a sly, dishonest fox, and his friend Gideon, a lazy, stupid cat. They spotted Pinocchio and decided then and there that they could sell him to Stromboli for a handful of gold. They told Pinocchio that he could be a famous star if he joined the theatre. Pinocchio had always wanted to be an actor, so he jumped at the chance of being on a stage and dancing and singing in front of people. So he followed honest John and Gideon into the theatre. Jiminy Cricket tugged at his arm and reminded him that he had to go to school, but Pinocchio paid no attention. That night, he danced in the puppet show and was filled with happiness when the audience clapped and cheered. Afterwards, he was given a golden florin by Stromboli.
"Oh, thank you," said Pinocchio. "I'm going to take this home to give to Geppetto."
"Oh, no, you're not," said Stromboli. "This is your home now."
And he locked Pinocchio in a cage. Pinocchio looked out from the bars and cried,
"Oh, I've been so foolish. What have I done?"
The blue fairy heard his cry and released him from his cage. When she asked him why he hadn't gone to school, Pinocchio lied and said,
"I was attacked by a huge green monster who wanted to chop me up for firewood."
As he spoke, Pinocchio's nose grew and grew and grew.
"My nose!"
he cried. The blue fairy laughed and told him that he must learn to tell the truth, or his nose would keep on growing. Pinocchio rushed home to tell Geppetto about his adventures. On the way, he met Honest John and Gideon. They told him that a coach was just about to leave for Pleasure Island.
"You will have so much fun with all the other boys on the coach," they said.
They didn't tell him that the wicked coachman Bruno was going to give them 50 golden florins for the little puppet boy Pinocchio. Jiminy Cricket tugged at his sleeve and said,
"Come home, Pinocchio. Geppetto's waiting for you."
But Pinocchio wanted to play with the boys, so he ignored Jiminy Cricket and climbed aboard the coach. Pleasure Island was a giant funfair with free rides for all the boys. They could play all day and be as naughty as they liked. Jiminy Cricket was worried. He didn't trust Bruno, the coachman. He begged Pinocchio to come home, but Pinocchio refused. So Jiminy Cricket made his way home alone. As he was leaving Pleasure Island, Jiminy Cricket heard the sound of donkeys braying. The noise came from a ship. Jiminy Cricket saw Bruno standing on the ship, shouting,
"Quiet, you boys, or I'll throw you overboard!"
Then Jiminy Cricket saw that Bruno was turning the boys on Pleasure Island into donkeys. Jiminy Cricket raced back to warn Pinocchio, but it was too late. Pinocchio's ears had turned hairy and long, and he had grown a tail. Pinocchio cried out,
"Help me, Jiminy Cricket! I've been so foolish. Take me home, please."
Together they ran for their lives and didn't stop till they reached home. When they got home, the house was dark and Geppetto was nowhere to be seen. Pinocchio was very worried. Suddenly they heard a bird singing. It was a swallow on the roof of the house. She told them that Geppetto had sailed off in search of Pinocchio, but a giant whale called Monstro had swallowed his boat whole, and now he was alive inside the whale's stomach. Pinocchio ran to the seashore. Though he was very frightened, he plunged into the cool water and swam down to the seabed in search of Monstro. But he could not see him anywhere. Then he came upon a shoal of parrotfish, who led Pinocchio to a huge sleeping mound, which turned out to be Monstro. As they got closer, he woke up and opened his mouth, swallowing the shoal of parrotfish and Pinocchio in one gulp. Geppetto and Pinocchio were reunited in Monstro's cavernous stomach. Now they had to plan their escape. Geppetto had built a small fire to keep himself warm. Pinocchio added more wood till it was a big smoky blaze. The smoke made Monstro's nostrils tickle, and he let out a huge sneeze. Geppetto and Pinocchio climbed aboard their raft and took their chance as Monstro's mouth opened. When he saw that they had escaped, Monstro was furious, and he swam at them, knocking the raft over and tipping them into the sea. Geppetto could not swim, so Pinocchio had to carry him on his back. Just when he thought he could swim no further, he saw the shoreline and Jiminy Cricket waiting for them. They were safe. When he reached the shore, Pinocchio fell down exhausted and lay completely still on the ground. Geppetto tried to wake him, but he did not move. Geppetto picked up the little wooden puppet and carried him home. He laid him on his bed and sat beside him weeping. Then, suddenly, the blue fairy appeared. She sprinkled her magic dust on Pinocchio's lifeless body, saying, "You have proved that you are honest and bold and wise, so now I am going to give you life." Pinocchio stood up and looked down at his arms and legs. They were not made of wood any more. He was a real boy. Geppetto and Pinocchio danced and sang. Jiminy Cricket laughed and thanked the Blue Fairy. Now Pinocchio would be able to tell the difference between right and wrong all by himself. The Three Billy Goats Gruff. Long, long ago, in the days when trolls wandered the earth, in a faraway land, there lived a big, hairy troll with lots of sharp yellow teeth and a huge red beard. Now, this troll wandered through the land, spreading fear wherever he went and eating whoever crossed his path. He had a huge appetite, and he was always hungry. He didn't care what he ate, so long as it was fresh. He ate dogs and cats and chickens and children and even grown-ups. But his favourite dinner of all was goat. One day, he decided that he'd been roaming around for long enough. He wanted to settle down and make a home somewhere. He searched high and low. He found a cave, but it was already full of trolls. He found a tree house, but a family of dwarfs had taken it. Then, at last, he found the perfect home under a wooden bridge that crossed a river. On one side of the bridge was a rocky road that led up to the mountain village, and on the other side was a green, grassy meadow. Many people used the bridge to get across the river. The troll would eat up anyone who crossed the bridge. The children used to love to play under the bridge and go fishing in the river, but they were very frightened of the troll, so they stopped coming to the river. Nobody from the village used the bridge anymore. Only strangers passing through would cross the bridge, and they never lived to tell the tale. Now, one day, 3 goats came down from the rocky mountainside searching for a green, grassy meadow. They were the 3 Billy Goats Gruff: Mummy Goat Gruff, Daddy Goat Gruff, and Baby Goat Gruff. They had been walking for many miles and were very hungry. Suddenly, Baby Goat Gruff spotted the bridge and the meadow on the other side. He tripped down the mountainside and galloped towards the bridge. His little hooves clattered on the wooden bridge. The troll was sleeping, but when he heard the clip-clop of Baby Goat Gruff's hooves, he awoke with a start and clambered onto the bridge. He roared,
"Who dares to try and cross my bridge?"
Baby Goat Gruff was filled with terror and squeaked,
It's only me, Baby Goat Gruff. Please, let me cross the bridge to the other side.
The troll licked his lips and said,
You would make a very tasty dinner. I'm going to eat you up."
Baby Goat Gruff trembled with fear and said,
Please, Mr. Troll, don't eat me. I'm only tiny. Why don't you wait for Mummy Goat Gruff? She's much bigger than me.
The troll had to agree that there wasn't much meat on Baby Goat Gruff, so he let him pass. Baby Goat Gruff scampered over the bridge and into the meadow, where he tucked into the delicious green grass. When Mummy Goat Gruff saw that Baby Goat Gruff had got over the bridge safely, she stepped onto the bridge. Her hooves went clip, clip, clop on the wooden bridge. At once the Troll appeared, his nostrils flaring and red beard wagging.
"Who dares to cross my bridge?"
he roared.
"It's only me,"
said Mummy Goat Gruff in a little voice.
"I only want to cross the bridge so I can get to the meadow on the other side."
The Troll licked his lips and said,
You would make a tasty dinner. I'm going to eat you up."
and he opened his wide mouth and showed his huge yellow teeth. Mummy Goat Gruff trembled with fear and said,
"Please, Mr. Troll, don't eat me. I'm only small. Why don't you wait for Daddy Goat Gruff? He's much bigger than me."
The Troll looked at Mummy Goat Gruff. He had to admit she was only a medium-sized goat, and he was very hungry, so he let her pass. Mummy Goat Gruff scampered over the bridge, kicked her heels up, and trotted into the meadow, and started to eat the delicious crisp green grass. When Daddy Goat Gruff saw that both Mummy Goat Gruff and Baby Goat Gruff had crossed safely over the bridge, he trotted down the mountainside and stepped onto the bridge. His hooves went clomp, climp, clomp on the wooden bridge. At once the Troll clambered onto the bridge and stood in front of Daddy Goat Gruff, blocking his path.
"Who dares to cross my bridge?"
roared the Troll. Daddy Goat Gruff lowered his two large horns and stared at the Troll.
"It's me, Daddy Goat Gruff,"
he said in his deep, goaty voice.
Said the Troll. "You will make a very big, tasty dinner. I'm going to eat you up."
And he licked his lips and opened his wide mouth, showing his big yellow teeth. But Daddy Goat Gruff just stared at him. He wasn't scared of the Troll.
"Oh, no, you're not,"
said Daddy Goat Gruff, "because I'm going to eat you up." And with that, he charged at the Troll. He galloped towards him with his big horns lowered, and with all his force he butted the Troll. The Troll flew high into the air and landed with a thump on the bridge.
"You don't scare me,"
he bellowed at Daddy Goat Gruff. He pulled out a heavy club from his belt. Daddy Goat Gruff turned his back on the Troll and took a step back towards the mountainside. The Troll walked towards Daddy Goat Gruff. Thump, thump, thump.
"I've got you now,"
he cackled. He raised the heavy wooden club above his head, and just as it was about to hit Daddy Goat Gruff on the back, Daddy Goat Gruff kicked up his back legs. His hooves went crunch on the Troll's nose.
"Oh!"
he wailed.
"Oh, my nose!"
The Troll spun round and clutched his nose. Daddy Goat Gruff took this chance to charge at him again. He galloped down the bridge, and with his big horns lowered, he tossed the Troll high into the air. This time the Troll landed in the river with a huge splash. The current was very strong, and the Troll couldn't swim. He was carried away by the rushing water. Daddy Goat Gruff trotted into the meadow where Mummy Goat Gruff and Baby Goat Gruff were happily eating the delicious crisp green grass.
"Look,"
said Daddy Goat Gruff. "Look at the Troll in the water." And the three Billy Goats Gruff watched the Troll being carried away by the fast-flowing river. Then they kicked up their heels and trotted away to enjoy the delicious crisp green grass. And from that day on, the people from the nearby village could come and go as they pleased across the bridge. And once again, the children came to play under the bridge and to fish in the river. And the 3 billy goats Gruff spent their days happily eating the grass in the meadow.
Babes in the Wood. Once upon a time, deep in a dark forest, an old owl was looking for his supper, flitting from tree to tree, searching for a tasty morsel or two. The rest of the forest creatures were snuggling down in their nests and burrows, getting ready for their night's rest. Suddenly, a loud crashing noise shattered the peace. Birds lifted their heads. Rabbits came to the entrances of their burrows and twitched their whiskers and waited to see what was causing the terrible noise. Then 2 burly figures appeared through the bushes, dragging 2 small children behind them, a boy and a girl. When they reached a clearing, the meanest-looking man said, "This'll do. No one will ever find them here. Come on, let's go." With that, he lifted a huge sack of treasure, which the 2 villains had stolen from the children's father, up onto his shoulders and made off through the trees, leaving the crying children all alone. The forest creatures stayed absolutely still. The only sound to be heard was the noise of branches snapping underfoot as the 2 retreating robbers left the sobbing children to their fate. As they lay comforting each other, the children eventually fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Then an old hedgehog ventured close to the children. He turned slowly and spoke to the forest creatures. "It's children. Looks like they've been abandoned." "Poor little things," said a deer, whose baby fawn stood close by to her with tears filling his soft brown eyes at the sight of the 2 helpless children. "We must do something," said the old owl, who was watching from a distance. They all agreed, and before long the forest was alive with activity. Squirrels rushed to and fro, fetching dry leaves, which they piled up and over the children to keep them warm. Rabbits scraped soft green moss from under the oak trees and gently pushed it under the children's heads for a soft pillow. Dormice collected nuts and edible mushrooms, while the birds collected juicy berries. "Good," said the old owl. "At least they'll be warm while they sleep, and when they wake they will have some food to eat." The forest creatures gathered around the 2 babes and discussed how best they could help them. Eventually it was decided that the magpie would fly off to find someone who could look after them. "I'll pick off a silver buckle from the boy's shoe, that I may attract someone's attention," said the magpie. With a quick hop, the magpie was at the boy's feet. His strong beak gleamed in the evening sun, and with a quick pecking movement the shiny buckle was in his mouth and off he flew. Before long it became very dark, and in the moonlight the creatures of the forest took turns to keep watch over the 2 children, who were now sleeping so soundly that not even the sound of dogs barking in the next valley could wake them. Early next morning, just as the sun's rays were attempting to pierce the foggy dew that sparkled over the forest floor like a blanket of diamonds, the magpie was still searching. For what, he wasn't quite sure. Suddenly, his wings began to ache, and he settled on a tree stump for a rest. And as he was resting, a strange noise reached his ears. It was the sound of a human voice. The magpie hopped down from the tree stump and over to a small thatched cottage that lay at the end of a cobbled path. He listened. "Oh, my poor children! What has happened to them? Will I ever see them again?" The magpie hopped up and perched on a windowsill. and saw inside a woodcutter crying, "My 2 babes gone!" The magpie had found the children's father. With a quick swoop, he flew down and landed at the woodcutter's feet. The man looked at the magpie and gasped, "What's this?" Slowly the magnificent bird dipped its head and dropped the shiny buckle onto the stone floor. "I recognize that buckle," the man said. Yes, it's from my son's shoe. Magpie, please, if you know of my children's whereabouts, please lead me to them." The magpie squawked and hopped back up onto the windowsill and then flew on to the tree stump and waited. The woodcutter ran from his cottage and followed him. And so it was that the brave magpie slowly led the woodcutter through the forest until they reached the clearing where the 2 babes were still fast asleep. As the friendly creatures watched, the woodcutter, who was overcome with joy, lifted the children up into his strong arms and carried them back to his cottage, where he tucked them into their safe, soft, warm beds. The forest creatures spoke of the adventure for many weeks afterwards, and soon the valleys for miles around had heard the tale of the babes in the wood. Rapunzel. Hundreds of years ago, in a far and distant land, there lived a very beautiful princess called Rapunzel. Her beauty was known throughout the kingdom, and men would fall in love with her at first sight. One day her father, the king, said to her, "Rapunzel, it is time for you to marry. I have arranged for some of the most handsome suitors to call upon you, and out of them you must choose a husband." Word soon spread to the villages, and for miles around all the talk was about who Princess Rapunzel would marry. Now, high up in a wooded hillside, a wicked goblin called Chinka heard of this news, and he decided that it should be he and none other that should marry the princess. But of course, he realized that the king would never allow him to enter the castle, let alone meet the beautiful bride-to-be. So he set about hatching an evil plan. The next day, Rapunzel was walking alone in the castle orchard, when suddenly out from behind an old pear tree leapt a fearsome-looking hunchback with only one tooth in the middle of his mouth. Before a scream could reach Rapunzel's lips, the ugly hobgoblin was at her side, and with an evil laugh he picked her up, lifted her onto his crooked shoulders, and with a massive leap he cleared the orchard wall and vanished with the terrified princess. The hobgoblin took Rapunzel deep into a faraway wood, where he locked her up in a tall tower that had no doorway or staircase, just a tiny window at the very top. Then, casting a magic spell, the wicked Chinka put the princess into a sleep that lasted for 5 long years. When at last Rapunzel woke, she was horrified to discover that her hair had grown so much that it nearly filled the tiny room in which she was being kept prisoner. Just then, she heard a voice cackling, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." She went over to the tiny window, looked down, and saw the ugly hobgoblin standing down below with a basket of delicious-looking food. She was so hungry that she tied her hair into a long braid and dropped it out of the window. Chinka grabbed the flaxen rope with his sharp, bony fingers and scrambled up into the tower. "I've brought you something to eat," he said. "You must be starving after such a long sleep." Rapunzel could not bear to look at him, as he was such a hideous creature, but she reached out and took the food and ate it all up. "If you will marry me, I will let you out of the tower," said the hobgoblin. "Never," said Rapunzel. "Very well, you shall stay here until you change your mind," he said. And with that, he threw Rapunzel's hair out of the window, slid down to the ground and disappeared through the undergrowth of the forest. The princess heard the same voice and the same question for many weeks afterwards. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. Will you marry me?" But the answer was always the same. Never. Being so lonely in the tower, Rapunzel would pass the time of day by singing sad, haunting tunes. One day, a prince was out hunting in the wood near the tower when he heard a beautiful voice floating through the pine trees. He stopped his horse, listened, and then followed to see where it was coming from. The prince found it impossible to go very far on horseback, as the undergrowth grew denser and denser. Still, the voice drew him onward. On foot now, the prince was cutting his way through thick brambles, till at last he saw the tower. And as he drew nearer, he realized that even though he hadn't seen her, he had fallen in love with a girl who sang so sweetly. Just then, a movement caught his eye. Chinka the hobgoblin was at the foot of the tower calling, "Rapunzel! Rapunzel! Let down your hair!" Immediately the singing stopped, and a sobbing noise took its place. The prince recognized the evil creature at once. And when, 10 minutes later, the laughing Chinka descended down Rapunzel's hair, the prince stepped forward and killed him with a single stroke of his sword. When the princess next heard the words, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she had no idea that it would be a handsome prince. The prince rescued Rapunzel from her tower, took her back to her father's castle, where they both lived happily ever after.